Teleporter activated.
Right. I'd complain about not being able to avoid these dangerous explosive devices, except that each one adds to your pirate map progress. How you get factual information from an explosion, though, I have no idea. That's right, it's white towel time once again. Well, at least it could be if I could find my white towel. So instead, you're looking at a brown sofa. I swear I am not trying to rip off Dr. Ashens. Anyways, today, presenting for your delectation... Okay, no more Dr. Ashens references. Today we're taking a look at Echelon, specifically the DOS version, because, you know, this is ancient DOS games, of course. And this is actually the very first fully boxed game to be gifted to me to review on ancient DOS games, coming straight from Jim Leonard, also known as Trickster, one of the co-founders of Moby Games. So thank you very much for this. I just kind of wish the game was better. Yeah, I know, you did warn me. Anyways, let's take a look inside here. All the goodies. The disc is falling out. Okay. So here's the disc. It's standard high density 5 1/4 inch floppy, because these things are made of win. And here we have the manual, and this is actually a really thick manual. And it doesn't even need to be this thick, because the game really isn't all that complicated. But the thing is, it goes into all kinds of details. Like, I mean, it's got control information, story background. This is a packed manual. Well, okay, it has these end parts here, so you can just fill in information as you go along. We'll get to that. And it's falling apart at the seams because Jim wanted to take the staples out so he could make an archival copy of this before giving it to me. Which is understandable. It's still a manual, even without the staples. And here we have the warranty card. I'll bet this can't be sent in anymore. And then finally, this is an interesting thing. This is actually the patrol zone map for the game. Basically, it covers all 6x6, 36 areas of the map that you can go through in the game, but it only has this little small section filled in at the start, with that section there being the one you start in. So it's kind of expecting you to fill in the rest of it on your own. Yeah, this is one of those games where you really need to have a pen and paper handy in order to write stuff down on everything. You know, some people like that, some people don't. I'm one of the ones that don't, but actually there's other things that are with this game, but, you know, we'll get into all that. So let's get to the game itself.
Ready.
So the game itself serves as a really good example of how a game can age poorly. The whole point of playing Echelon is to explore a fairly sizable world and collect artifacts in order to decipher the codes and steps as to how to reveal the main base of operations for a band of space pirates. The thing is that there's very little to do outside of the exploration aspect, and even the combat aspect is extraordinarily simple. The game relies on its graphics rather than its gameplay to keep the player interested. And if the game only lasted an hour or two, this wouldn't be such a big deal. But this game takes hours on end to finish if you've never played it before, and can be completed really quickly if you know exactly what to do. So the bulk of the game is spent simply trying to learn what you're supposed to do, then go do it and win. Because of the pace of computer technology in the late 80s and early 90s, this game became outdated within just a couple of years, and as such, rapidly became more of a curiosity than something to come back to every so often. You'll often hear game designers nowadays tell you that gameplay is far more important than graphics, which some people consider to be an excuse for making games with lesser graphics than typical commercial fare, but you know what? This statement very much applies even to games from the 80s and 90s. If your gameplay's not solid, then you're doomed to obscurity no matter how good your graphics are.
8-step, active.
Echelon was originally created and released by Access Software in 1988, though in 1989 they released an updated version using their patented RealSound technology, which could play back digitized sound over a PC speaker surprisingly well. And that's actually the version I've got here. It's a one-player first-person simulation game with support for Hercules, CGA, Tandy, and EGA graphics devices, though the Tandy and EGA 320x216 color modes are the ones that look the best. As for sound support, since the RealSound tech didn't require anything more than a PC speaker, nothing more than the PC speaker is supported. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, and finding copies of this game online from places like Amazon and eBay can be a bit tricky, since you're far more likely to come across the Commodore 64 release than any of the others. The C64 releases are cheap, often running $10 to $15 for a fully boxed copy. However, DOS copies, should you come across them, are much more pricey depending on which version of the game it is and whether or not you're getting the box and manuals and everything. The prices can be as low as $15 or as high as $50, so keep your eyes open. Also, be aware that there's been not just one, but two games following this one that are also called Echelon. One was released in 1998, and it basically plays like a Command & Conquer clone, while the other one was released in 2001, and that one's more like a cross between Wing Commander and a flight simulator. In fact, that one actually looks kind of interesting, so I may have to go try it in some time. Now, before I tell you guys the story to this game, there's something I want you all to keep in mind. You see, because this game was released in the 80s, information about our solar system in general still wasn't as complete or as defined as it is now. For one thing, Pluto was still considered a planet as opposed to a dwarf planet, and there were all kinds of theories, even as early as the discovery of Neptune in the 1800s, that there might actually be a 10th planet in the solar system. The reason I'm explaining this is because pretty much the entire story in Echelon hinges around the discovery of a 10th planet in our solar system in 1996, an event which obviously didn't actually happen 17 years ago. In any case, this 10th planet was named Isis and was discovered to have come from outside of our solar system, as it showed signs of previous habitation, but its distance from our own sun was way too far to provide an environment capable of supporting any kind of life. Eventually, over the course of a century, spaceflight improves, an alien race is encountered, a war takes place, ultimately ending in a peace treaty, and now various colonies have been set up throughout the solar system between Earth and Isis. Then, around 2083, a year following a massive prison breach, pirates begin to show up raiding various outposts throughout the solar system. The International Space Federation, also known simply as the ISF, begins a process of narrowing these attacks down, trying to figure out where these pirates are coming from, and eventually they trace the attacks back to ISIS. Thus, the ISF sets up an echelon based on ISIS and begins performing routine patrols of various areas to find clues as to the whereabouts of the pirates' secret headquarters. You start the game shortly after the development and deployment of a brand new combat and exploration vehicle known as the C-104 Tomahawk. You play the role of one of the best pilots to come out of Echelon, and as such you've been assigned to a patrol zone where the pirate base is guaranteed to be. But it's been found out that the base is perfectly cloaked from detection. Your task is to find clues about how the base was set up and how to bypass its cloaking system so that Echelon can send in everything they have to eradicate the pirate threat once and for all.
Timer off.
Now, when I said this game was like Elite, I was mostly going by screenshots and reviews of the game, since it really does have that same kind of wireframe first-person look that Elite has, plus takes place in the future and mentions space travel in its story. That's about where the similarities end though, because the gameplay is very much not like Elite in the slightest. For starters, this game does not take place in space, as the C-104 is an advanced aircraft, capable of gravity manipulation and perfect motion, able to turn and move in just about any direction you'd want it to, as well as the ability to stop in place in an instant and stay perfectly motionless. For another thing, this is an exploration game first and a combat game second. In fact, it's a very distant second, as the combat system is designed to be as extremely simple as possible. In fact, combat is disabled by default when you start a new game, and has to be enabled through the options menu. When combat is active, every once in a while an enemy pirate will show up and you can either try to blast it down for some points, or just let it take a few pot shots at you before it runs away. The enemy pirates never stick around for more than a moment, and you have to get hit 100 times in order for your shields to run out, so it's not like you're going to take much damage or get destroyed anytime soon. But yeah, since the primary goal of the game is to decipher how to make the pirate base appear, what you need to do is go around to various areas and sectors and find artifacts to teleport aboard and scan. These artifacts show up on your main display as small flashing purple hourglass symbols, and they only show up in the first person view and not your overhead scanners. Once you find one, you have to follow a specific procedure to teleport it on board. Specifically, you get in close, using your bottom view camera to position yourself directly over top of an artifact, hover downwards until you're below 50 meters, then simply press the teleport key. Whenever you grab a new artifact, you're first asked if you want to cash it in for credits or not. 99% of the time, you're going to want to, since this is how you get exploration points as well as the pieces to your 6 pirate maps, detailing clues as to how to deactivate the pirate base's cloaking field. The other 1% of the time is when the artifact has a large number of pirate ciphers on it, which you can't decode and you don't feel like writing down for later translation. Though honestly, this is one of those games where you really want to keep a pen and paper handy, because many of the things you learn, such as the pirate ciphers, aren't stored anywhere in the game, so you need to keep track of them yourself. Now, me personally, I prefer games that are self-contained and don't require you to write things down or browse FAQs just to understand what you should be doing. However, this game came out at a time when not everyone had completely made the digital transition. Plus, there was a thought that by having the player interact with the game outside of the game, it would help to make the game feel more immersive. It doesn't actually work that way, but truth be told, some people enjoy the whole process of doing stuff outside of a game to continue playing it. So yeah, that's just a thing really, and it'll probably heavily factor into how much you would enjoy this game. In terms of what you can do outside of just exploring for artifacts, there's not really a lot to say. Like, you have 3 different weapons: the H-Staps, Photon Cannon, and Missiles, ordered from left to right respectively. They all function exactly the same, and each can take out an enemy in a single shot, but the difference is in range and weight, with H-Staps having the shortest range but using the least amount of weight, Missiles having the longest range but taking up the most amount of weight, and the Photon Cannon is between those two extremes. The other thing that takes up weight is your fuel, so the more ammunition you load, the less fuel you can carry. Though, I don't know if this is a bug or a problem with DOSBox or what, but for some reason, I've never seen my fuel gauge drop. It's almost as if I've got infinite fuel or something. I've tried downloading other copies of the game from less than legitimate places, and I've run into the same problem with every version, with one big exception. In the very original version that doesn't have the real sound system in place, fuel levels work properly. So yeah, I have no idea what's going on with that. Really though, fuel is just a minor concern in the grand scheme of things, thanks to your hyperdrive. At any point in time, you can bring up your zone map, which shows you a basic overlay of the 36 areas comprising the patrol zone you're assigned to. From this map, you can actually engage a hyperdrive system, allowing you to instantly teleport into any area you want at the push of a button. Thus, if you ever did need to refuel, it's just a matter of jumping back into area B3 where you started from and linking back up with the docking station. This is also what you need to do if you ever take system damage from teleporting an explosive device aboard, or if you just need to repair your shields or reload your weapons. And yeah, I'm already running out of stuff to talk about. There's so little game in this game that it feels more like a software toy than something with a logical end goal. It kind of likes the SimCity games in that regards, and I think the developers knew this because there's a number of things you can do in the game that are completely pointless and have no effect on anything, like flying through the various training courses scattered around in various areas. These training sections are meant to teach you about how to control your C-104 and such, but since there's no hit detection with anything but enemies enemies in the surface, and because these training sections aren't really measured in any way, it's up to you to use these things for your own purposes. There's even a stopwatch function you can access for the sole purpose of timing yourself as you play around with these aspects. I guess the only other thing left to talk about really is the Remote Piloted Vehicle, also known as the RPV. This device is basically something you can deploy while you're landed on the surface that can move around and act much like a second vehicle. However, it doesn't have any weapons and can't do anything that the C-104 itself can't do. Plus, the procedure for switching your controls between the C-104 and the RPV is a little buggy and can sometimes cause your C-104 to start moving while it's still landed at ground level, causing substantial amounts of damage. So yeah, I don't recommend using the RPV for anything.
Area map on.
If I had this game back when it was brand new, I probably would have played the heck out of it, and maybe would have even seen it all the way through to the end and found all 240 artifacts to crack the pirate code and win the game. As it stands though, it's very weak in the gameplay department and relies far too heavily on its technological aspects to carry the weight of the gameplay. And because of that, it just doesn't hold up anymore as something that's worth playing for hours on end. It's still an interesting game for those reasons, and worth trying at least once if you have any interest at all in old DOS simulation titles, but ultimately, it's a boring and highly repetitive game that was severely outdated within 2 years of its release, so it's no surprise that barely anyone talks about it anymore. In terms of setting this game up in DOSBox, you need to set a fixed cycles count, otherwise the game will play way too fast. Now, I was playing with a setting of 2500, and that's actually the setting I recommend playing at, but interestingly enough, that's actually faster than most computers of the time could process this game at. So if you want to play this game with a cycle setting that's more similar to what computers at the time were capable of, you need to cut that cycles count in half to about 1300. Now, the game also has joystick support, but I don't recommend playing this game with a joystick or gamepad because a lot of what you need to do requires very accurate motions, and the joystick support is digital, not analog, meaning it can't record these subtle movements that you would expect out of a simulation game. Not to mention, the real sound effects lock up the joystick controls when they're playing, which is kind of a stupid problem, and even the game knows that this problem is there, so yeah, don't use a joystick. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week for episode 122, yeah, I think it's about time we added a second barrel to our shotguns. I'm pretty sure most of you know which game that will be, so send your guesses as soon as you can to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned as our trek through DOS gaming continues.
Missiles activated. Missiles deactivated.